I just closed on a transaction where I helped an individual buy a minority or partial ownership of a small manufacturing company here in Portland. And there were some lessons learned in that experience that I thought I would share with you. So if you're looking to purchase or offered the opportunity to purchase and become a partial owner of a privately held business, stick around because I think this video will be informative. As always, if you've got questions as I go through this presentation, please feel free to leave them in the comments section below or just pop me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as I can and we can talk about whatever is on your mind. In addition, if you find this episode helpful, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button. And with that, let's talk about buying into or partial ownership of a privately held company. Now there's a lot of reasons why you'd want to consider this. You'd become an owner, not an employee. You'd have a seat at the table to actually influence the direction and outcome of the company. Job security. In big layoffs, usually the shareholders are the last to go and shut the door. And then the big reason I think that most people consider it is the upside, whether that's sharing the yearly profits of the company after dividends or tax payments are made. And then if the company's ever sold, enjoying some of the proceeds of the increased value of the company. But how do you evaluate this opportunity? Well, I think I've broken this down into 4 basic components. 1, things you should consider. 2, what you can't do as a minority owner, and this is important for you to understand. What you may have to do as a minority owner or partial owner. And then lastly, how do you protect yourself using a partnership or shareholder agreement? At a high level, there are 3 or 4 things you really should consider when evaluating an opportunity to become a partial owner of a privately held company. And the first one is evaluating the majority shareholder. As a majority owner, they have a lot more power than you'll have coming in as a minority partner. So I think it's really important to understand who that individual is. And character matters because you want to be treated fairly, and past history is a real indicator on how that might transpire. But how long have they owned the company? If you've got somebody that's only been there for a year, kind of need to consider that versus somebody that's been there 10 years. And then lastly, when thinking about an owner, you need to think about how long they're planning to own the company and or their shares. So again, if you've got somebody that's been there for 10 years, but's planning on exiting in the next 12 to 18 months, you need to understand how that might affect a couple things. One, maybe the company will be sold outright. A capital event if the majority shareholder wants to retire or be bought out. The company may be under an obligation to actually do that, and that would be taking on more debt on the balance sheet. So again, thinking about who the majority shareholder is, character, how long they've owned the company, and how long they plan on owning the company. And then after that, you need to think about a partnership or a shareholder agreement. Do they have one? And if so, you need to get a copy, read it, because this will spell out your rights, obligations, and options to either buy or sell, and what happens in different events. So really think about taking a good hard look at reading that and understanding their partnership agreement. And then see if they've had any recent valuations. I do a lot of valuation work for partnerships where they're trying to do a buyout one way or the other. Could be for shareholder dispute. So there are a lot of reasons to do it. But if they've had a recent valuation done, you'd want to take a look at that, because that'll give you a good idea of the fair market value, if that's how it was calculated, of the company. Another item you want to do is take a look at their financials. Get their last 2 to 3 years worth of tax returns and take a look at their current balance sheet. Now, the balance sheet's going to tell you a lot about their current debt load, obligations of the company, and obviously the profits and loss, and the tax returns will tell you how profitable the company is. And then, if you can, get a distribution or dividend history for the last 2 or 3 years. And this will tell you on a historic basis whether that profit that we talked about in the other segment is being shared with the other owners on a yearly basis. So again, kind of summing this up, who's the majority shareholder is, and again, character matters. Do they have a partnership agreement? Recent valuations, reviewing the financials, and distribution history. It matters. Let's discuss the difference between a majority shareholder, somebody who owns 51%, and minority shareholders, and their individual rights as they manage the company with a bunch of owners. So if you own 51%, you basically have the say-so in how the company is run. Obviously, you've got partners, other shareholders that will have an influence, and any good senior partner is going to listen to those people around him. But at the end of the day, the majority shareholder has the ability to do quite a bit of, with the company without the consent of the minority shareholders. So let's talk about some of the obvious. Declaring and paying dividends. Again, if the majority shareholder decides they want to retain earnings for growth in the company, they have the right to do that. Appoint or hire management, determine management compensation, set policy and strategic decisions in running the business or moving it forward. Acquire, liquidate the assets of the company. If they want to sell some of the equipment to raise capital to do something else, they do have the power to do that. Taking on debt, again, to reinvest in the company, they have the ability without the consent of the other shareholders, as long as they're the majority owner, to do so. Liquidate, dissolve, sell, or recapitalize the business. Actually change the articles of incorporation or the bylaws. Elect directors of the company. Now, you as a minority shareholder, depending upon how the bylaws are written or the partnership agreement is written, you may not have any of this power to make these decisions. Now again, if you've done your research on the character of the majority shareholder, kind of how the company's set up, it may not be of any consequence. But just understanding the difference between being a majority shareholder and a minority shareholder, you need a good, clear picture before you make a decision, or at least doing the valuation of this type of opportunity. We just talked about all the things that you probably won't be able to do, but let's talk about some of the things you may be obligated to do being a minority shareholder. And again, part of this comes down to how much of the company you own. Generally, if you're a 20% owner of a company or higher, you're probably going to be asked or required to personally guarantee obligations of the business, which could be loans and facility leases. You may also be named in, have some legal liability if you're named in a lawsuit, and tax liabilities, which could be state, federal, and or payroll taxes. If those aren't kept up by the majority shareholder, part of that's going to come back to you. So again, understanding the differences between what you're probably not going to be able to do, and what you may be obligated to do as an individual shareholder is important in evaluating any opportunity. How do you protect yourself? You've looked at this opportunity and you want to move forward, but you need some guarantees or some assurance on what your rights, obligations, and options are in being a partial owner. The document to look at is a partnership or shareholder agreement. And there's really maybe 3 sections that you should really take a hard look at. The first one is, how are the shares valued in the event that there's a death, disability, retirement, some unforeseen circumstances where your shares may be sold or bought from you, and how does that value determined? Well, there's 4 basic ways to determine the value of, in a shareholder agreement, of those shares. The first is fair market value. Now that's the highest standard and will get you the value of those shares if the company was put up for sale, plus or minus discounts for lack of marketability and lack of control. So it's really important to understand that. Fair value. Now, fair value is a value that is established by the state, and in most states it's the same as fair market value with no discounts for lack of control or marketability. Book value. Now, I see this quite a lot in a lot of businesses. It is really, book value is the difference between a company's assets and its liabilities marked to market, and that will give you the book value of the company. And it's usually a lot lower than the fair market or fair value of a company. And then lastly, some companies or shareholder agreements just have a simple formula that they've put in. It may be 3 times EBITDA or 2 times trailing EBITDA. So there's some formula that will establish those share values. But whatever they are, you want to make sure that it's clearly defined and explained so that you understand what the value of your shares are. Obviously, if you're purchasing and or selling those. And then the second thing is events that trigger either an option or an obligation to buy or sell. And we call these triggering events. And they really include death, disability, bankruptcy, termination of employment, and sometimes mandatory retirement age. So again, you want to understand what those events are, and then what your rights and obligations and options are in any of those events. Again, should take the time to read this agreement because these are really important. And then retiring shareholder. Now, we've talked about the difference between a majority shareholder and a minority shareholder. If you've got a $20 million company, and let's say that's the fair market value of the company, and you have somebody that owns 60% of that company, then they're going to be, if they decide to retire, they're going to be looking for a $12 million check from the company to repurchase those shares. And we call this a capital event. And obviously, this could put a capital constraint on the business. And actually, if not done correctly and planned for, it could force the company to be sold. But you want to take a look at how that's put together. Death of a majority shareholder. Do you have life insurance that the company's paying for that's going to make for a big down payment towards the heirs of that shareholder for the company? And then maybe build in a terms the company can repurchase those shares or pay for them over a period of time. Remember, this could be a very large capital event if the majority shareholder decides to retire or there's a death involved. So understanding your partnership agreement or shareholder agreement, you want to understand how the shares are valued, events that trigger either a purchase or sale of shares and what your obligations, options are with any of those events, and then the capital event surrounding how that's being handled around the majority shareholder. Understanding how to value an opportunity to become a partial owner of a privately held company is fairly important, and you want to make the right decision over and above just probably getting a great job opportunity. You want to think about the history of the company, profitability, if you've got a majority shareholder, understanding his or her character, how long they've been there, how long they plan on being there, and then the things and obligations that you can't do and some of the obligations you may have to take on as a minority shareholder. And then lastly, just understanding the partnership agreement. And that's really the thing that'll protect you and your individual rights, obligation, and options as a shareholder. So I hope you got something out of this video, and if you did, please hit the like and subscribe button. And with that, I'll see you on the next episode.